beautiful people. My name is Emma.
And I'm MC.
And we are your hosts of the G-Forces podcast. So, we just watched the Belgian Grand Prix, and it was exciting. I feel like it was kind of a bit more of a tame race for, like, the exciting races this season, because sometimes I feel like the battles have been kind of insane. This, I think, follows a lot of the other races this season where your pit stop and your strategy, that's the theme of the season. Strategy is the most important thing.
Yeah, I mean, like we said last episode, I think the cars have just gotten so close.
Yeah.
I think the domination of the Red Bull is less of a factor anymore.
Yeah.
And so I think that the tire deg, the tire strategy, I think the pit, like when to come into the pit, is really making or breaking some teams, and specifically some team drivers.
Yeah.
I also think you're seeing the rise and fall of some teams really fast, and that immediate success is awesome, but also, like, it's hard to achieve, and sometimes it can be hard to maintain.
Yeah,
So, I think there's, like, I think that's why we're seeing 7 different people having won Grand Prix, is because it is going to be all over the place this season. But that's what we like. Like, that's what we want at the end of the day. So I'm not complaining.
So, something that Mary Kathleen doesn't know about, which I was going to save it for closer to the end because it has to do with the results of the race, but I'm going to say it now because I'm not going to be able to hold back. Obviously, the race finished, and something that happened last season happened again this season to a different person. After the race, they weighed George Russell's car. It was 1.5 kilograms underweight, so he was disqualified from the race, and Lewis Hamilton was promoted to Grand Prix winner.
Wow.
So now he's won 105 races. George has been disqualified. Mercedes had a very good response. Toto posted it. They had a post on their Instagram, and he was like, we have to take this disqualification on the chin. We have to learn from it. We messed up, obviously, if it was underweight, so we just have to learn from it, especially with it being a 1-2. It obviously is disappointing, but we head into the summer race with hopes that we can replicate this in the next part of the season, but not get disqualified.
Who did it happen to last season again?
Charles and Lewis at Coda.
That's what I thought. Yeah. I mean, it's happened.
It's happened.
It sucks.
It does suck.
At least Mercedes was able to get a win regardless, I guess.
Yeah. That's very true. Well, and then just some news before we jump into the track info. Esteban Ocon was, before this race weekend started, he was announced that he signed a multi-year deal with Haas, so he will be Ollie Behrman's teammate next year. And
none of these deals have really confirmed how long, to my understanding.
Yeah, I'm guessing I'm guessing all of these deals that are multi-year deals are either multi-year deals in the sense that, like,
based off of performance. Yeah,
if it's somebody like Charles Leclerc, I think it's multi-year deal based off the performance of Ferrari and not him, so he can leave if they're not performing.
Okay.
And then for a person like Esteban or Ollie, it's a multi-year deal in the sense that, like, they can be fired if they're not performing.
Okay.
Yeah.
Fun.
Yeah.
Love that.
Gotta love that for them. I think that was there was another rumor actually that's been swirling around, which was confirmed to be not true. Marcus Ericsson, who's a former F1 driver who drives for an IndyCar team now, he had an interview or something with Viaplay, I don't know what it's called. And he mentioned that, like, Logan Sargent's having a really bad time at Williams, and that him and James Vowles aren't even on speaking terms. And Marcus Ericsson is Kyle Kirkwood's teammate, and Kyle Kirkwood is very good friends with Logan Sargent.
Okay.
So people were like, okay, so this must be true. And then Logan Sargent was like, Marcus Ericsson, you better keep my name out of your mouth. Like, you don't know what you're talking about.
Okay.
So I'm glad to kind of see that was shut down a bit. If anything, I think if they're not, like, talking, I'm guessing it's more like James isn't giving him, like, tips anymore because he's more focusing on trying to find a driver for next year, which, not great, but also a little valid at times.
Yeah, I mean, when do you the door's halfway shut at this point. You know, I hate to be that person, but Logan's obviously not continuing in the sport next year. It's not like it's unexpected, and so if he's not the number one, if he's not the focus, that's it. Like, that's the end of the day. I mean, it would blow, but I'm glad it's been proven wrong, but also I'm sure there's probably some level of, like, they're not talking as much as they were at one point.
Yeah.
You know, they're
You have to start to develop other drivers.
Yeah. It's changing of the guard at the end of the day.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I think that's all the news that I had. Did you have anything else?
No.
All right. Let's get into the track info.
All right, so the official race name for this weekend was the Formula One Rolex Belgian Grand Prix 2024. The circuit name was Circuit de Spa Francorchamps. I struggle. I'm sorry, guys.
AKA Spa.
AKA Spa, yeah. Everyone just calls it by Spa.
The only Spa you leave feeling more stressed than when you arrived.
Probably. The first F1 Grand Prix was in F1's inception year, 1950, and the current circuit length is 7.04 kilometers, or 4.4. That's so embarrassing. 4.352 miles. The drivers did 44 laps around this circuit, and the entire distance is 308.052 kilometers, or 191.414 miles. So one of the longer circuits, if not the longest. I'm not sure. The lap record was placed in 2018 by Valtteri Bottas, so he was with Mercedes at this point in his career, and he did a lap in 1:46.286 seconds. There are 19 turns and 2 DRS zones, so DRS detection zone 1 is between turns 1 and 2, with activation starting a little after turn 4, and then detection zone 2 is between turns 17 and 18, and activation is between turns 18 and 1. If you want to know more about, like, the history and a little bit about the background of the track, that's what we did last episode, so we did a deep dive into that, just kind of explaining, it's been on the calendar since 1950, sporadically, but it's been racing since even longer, since even before then.
I think this year was technically, like, the 99th year that this race has ever happened.
Yeah, I think it was 1925 that the, first, quote-unquote Belgian Grand Prix happened. So, yeah, that's the track. It is known for its speed. It's known for its danger. And I think a lot of the drivers really genuinely like it. And the weather is ridiculous all the time.
Yeah, it was
sunshine, monsoons at one point.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
All right, time for practice. So, I personally, you're gonna get mad at me. I didn't watch any of the practices this weekend.
I did, guys, don't worry.
I took notes on them. It was a very hectic weekend for me, and I didn't really have time to actually watch the practices. This is the first time this has ever happened to me.
Okay, so for those that have been following pretty consistently, know that we're currently in the middle of a move. This weekend and next weekend are, our big move weekends. So, long story short, Emma, on top of work, moving, she does most of the social media posts. Everything she's doing, she didn't have time to watch practice.
Yeah.
Which, thank God our move is, coincidentally
with summer break.
Because I'm stressed.
If this was in the middle of the triple header, I think I would have died.
The eye twitch is strong already.
Luckily,
yeah, I did watch practice.
Yeah. And I took notes. on practice on the reports.
And honestly, like we've said, the last few Grand Prix, practice has been very sleepy. It's been Sleepy Town.
There's only been like a little bit that happened this weekend.
Yeah. This weekend was not so sleepy.
This was the first time in a while that it wasn't so sleepy.
Yeah, shout out Lance. We'll get to that.
So, FP1, we have my first note based off of the report that I read. Daniel spun at La Source, narrowly avoiding the barriers. Mm-hmm. If you want to comment on that.
That's really it. He narrowly avoided it.
That's good for him that he narrowly avoided it.
Yeah,
truly.
That's pretty much what the pundits said. They were like, oh,
cool.
That could have been bad. Like, I don't know.
Ocon was out for like 2 seconds, then went back into the pits because of a water leak.
Okay, yeah. So, Esteban, there was someone else rolled, like had a rollback. No, that was Joe during the race today. Yeah. Esteban, went out, first lap, his team was like, you need to come in immediately. Sorry, I'm choking.
Oh my gosh.
Sorry. His team was like, you need to come in immediately. And he was like, what? And they're like, just come in. It ended up being a suspected water leak issue. I feel like this is not the first time we've seen this issue.
Well, especially with the new liveries they had this weekend, which we didn't even mention.
Oh, yeah.
Alpine had so I think it was Pierre had the Wolverine livery, and then Esteban had the Deadpool livery, in honor of the Deadpool and Wolverine movie that just came out this weekend, because one of their owners is Ryan Reynolds. Well, investors, not owners.
You know, it's weird. People are gonna, like, talk about that livery the way we talk about the Star Wars livery.
That's very true.
Weird.
But I think the Star Wars livery had a bit more success than the Deadpool and Wolverine one.
Well, because they had, like, it was just better executed.
Yeah.
Anyways, also, during FP1, it was confirmed that Yuki and Max would suffer grid place penalties. Mm-hmm. It wasn't told how much. It was just kind of...
Everybody guessed it correctly, though.
Everyone knew going into this weekend. I mean, it was even discussed, I think, at the, like, post-race show last weekend that people were like, Max is inevitably going to have a...
It's going to happen
there's
at least a few more times throughout the rest of the season.
They're maxing out. So that was confirmed. And then the top three, which I was happy to see, Max on top. I wasn't happy to see Max on top. Sorry, the way that sentence came out. It was just typical Max, Oscar in second, and then I was happy to see Alex Albon coming in with the third time. Again, it's only practice, but still, love a Williams success.
FP2, nothing happened.
Absolutely nothing happened. I can confirm that.
It was just like a normal quali practice for people.
It was just running their things, doing their things.
Just checking to make sure things are good.
I mean, I think about how boring our pre-race practices were.
Oh, like, yeah. Just doing the things that you need to make sure you, like, are up to speed.
Yeah.
Like, make sure nothing's rusty.
It was confirmed at this point that Max would get a 10-place grid penalty, so he was on his 5th internal combustion engine, and then the top three of this session were Lando, Oscar, and Max. So, yeah, FP3 was where...
Yeah, FP3
I have a bunch of notes. But things happened.
Yeah, there was even a race in the middle of FP3, actually.
Yeah.
A karting race.
Yeah.
Okay. So, there was rain overnight and in the mornings right before FP3, so the track was quite damp, so everybody started off on inters and wet tires. The rain actually did start again at some point, pretty early on in the session, and that caused both Yuki and Lando to run wide, and I'm sure probably others.
Yeah, so, like, the track started wet, and then... everyone was like, we need to get out right away. And apparently, I don't know how true this was, Sam Collins is talking about this. He wasn't sure if because of the geography where this race course is, it's in the mountains. It's rolling hills. I don't know if it's considered mountains, but it's like rolling landscape. And that can make specific, like, certain types of radar, specifically weather radar, a little more difficult. It'll bounce off, the land. I know nothing about this, so don't quote me. I'm sorry. I'm just repeating
Did
what
I hear
they
him
say.
correctly when he said that a lot of teams will literally have people drive like an hour away?
I don't know how true that is, but
I thought I heard him say that.
did. He was talking about how, like, some teams, if they think a rain cell is in a certain area, they'll have, like, a team member bike out, like, 20 minutes, get on a radio, and be like, hey, the rain's incoming. I don't know if that's currently what they do, or if that's something that they used to do, or whatever, but...
I wouldn't be shocked if they still do it sometimes.
I mean, it really just, like, sometimes you just need, like, human eyes on it.
Yeah.
But because of this, it ended up just, like, coming down.
Yeah.
And you could tell how people were slowly coming in, but then, of course, there were the few people that were, Yuki, Landa, that were staying out, including Lance. So then Lance lost control of his car because of the rain, and basically he ended up hitting the wall, and, I think it was his front left tire was basically, like, falling off. For those that are new, just remember FP3 happens for this type of race weekend.
Only a couple hours before quali.
Yeah, so the team can do the repair work, but they just are limited on time. So this obviously put a wrench in...
Literally, Lance's car.
Yeah. So red flags were raised, 40 minutes left in the session, and the red flags were lifted, but no one obviously went out because it was, like, freaking storming.
Well, and then red flags came up again.
Because of the weather.
Yeah.
And that's ultimately the session.
Well, so when the red flags came up again, there was still... there was, like, a little go-kart track, like, at the race weekend, and so... the commentators, because they couldn't comment on anything happening in F1, F1 TV decided to film the karting race going on, and they started commentating on that, which the videos of it are very entertaining, actually. I think it's those moments that I really love listening to and watching, because it really just reminds you how much that the commentators just enjoy motorsports in general.
Well, and I weirdly, as utterly useless of, well, not utterly useless, but basically as, like, the sort of washout that a practice session like this is, I feel like there's something very homey about, like, all the drivers in the garage waiting out the rain.
Literally,
like,
a couple years ago.
It very much reminds me of, like, all of the, like, travel teams that we've all been on. Yeah. All of the weekends and the weird hallways and the random-ass schools we've all just had to, like, wait out. And so, I don't know, it like, makes it feel very human and less, like, this...
A couple years ago, I think it was the actual race day that was delayed or something, and, like, that's where and it's all too much for little Lando Norris comes from. Like, that's the videos of Seb and Mick Schumacher playing soccer in the, like, Haas or Aston garage. Yeah. Like, that's where all of that comes from. Yeah, it's very wholesome.
I feel like it's also very, like, we can all relate as, people, if you grew up doing sports or any sort of extracurricular. Mm-hmm. But yeah, so the top three that session was Max, Oscar, and Pierre, but obviously it was based off of, like, really shitty.
Barely any time to practice.
So.
The Astons were having trouble again. There was at one point in one of the practices where Fernando was like, is the engine working?
They're just, like... so currently forgettable.
Yeah.
That sounds terrible, but they're just not. I don't think about them.
Yeah.
And that sounds
I forget
terrible.
about them in the middle of the race sometimes.
Yeah.
I agree. Okay. We're going to move on to qualifying now, which is something that I did watch. So, got more comments for that one.
Okay, so in the pre-quali show, a big issue that they were talking about that I guess, like, it's pretty basic thinking when you think about it. But a big issue that the teams were facing was that quali, I mean, they just had a pretty rainy FP3. Quali was expected to be pretty wet in general. And so because of that, the setups for the session couldn't be like, they couldn't set the car up for a wet drive due to parc fermé, but also the entire day for the race was expected to be perfect weather. And so they had to do a complete dry setup in horrible weather, which added an extra factor to it, and really an extra complication.
It messed up some people's qualifying, like where they would normally qualify, they qualified a little bit lower than expected because of that setup change.
Yeah, so, I mean, definitely something that teams are constantly dealing with. It shows
it's not something that I've ever really thought about, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, I'm curious, like, how you play a weekend like that, but I mean,
again, strategy, the most important thing.
Yeah. So Q1.
So everyone started on inters because the track was wet. That's usually what you do when the track is wet.
One would say.
And a lot of people actually throughout this session, so everybody, because the rain was expected, everybody was out. And
I love rain qualies.
I love rainy qualies.
Love a rain quali.
Or the threat of rain quali, because everyone's scared.
Quali. Yeah, everyone's on the edge of their seat. They're like, oh shit, we gotta get the time in.
Yeah, it's great. It makes it so much more interesting.
Because they're actually, they're always trying, but they're actually like...
Yeah, full send. Everybody needs to go now. And I think people were actually, a lot of people, because of the setup issues, people were having a hard time, like, actually putting in a really good lap. That a lot of people ended up switching onto a second set of inters in the middle of it, which I feel like normally we don't see people switch tires in the middle of, like, Q1. Usually, like, you'll have a set of softs on for all of Q1, and then if you make it to Q2, then you'll switch. Or, like, if you're on a team, like, stake and you need to make sure to make it to Q2, then you'll switch in the middle of Q1. But like usually the top performing teams are not switching that fast. Okay. And everybody actually did apparently except for Max, which I thought was interesting. And I think the person who I feel like was struggling the most during this was Lando. Oscar was outperforming him significantly until Q3, but yeah, Lando just couldn't do it.
It seemed like a bit of an off weekend. I don't know if maybe it was something off with the car, maybe it was just the pressure of the past week, who knows, but it just seemed like a little bit like an off weekend.
Even his interviews, he seemed, I don't know, off. I think they need summer break.
We all do.
The track evolution was insane during it.
Yeah, so that's the one thing. Through most of quali, the constant changing of times made it difficult to, like, write out full notes because it would just be annoying. But a few names, I feel like every single time there were some big names that were kind of in threat. So Lando and George were both two of the people under threat. So, like we just said, Lando was struggling. And I don't know if it was just, like, the Mercedes struggle that they've been having sometimes during quali, but they were able to pull out fast laps moving up the lineup. But I think, again, every single time you would do a fast lap, you'd move up to, like, third, and then you drop down to, like, 6 or 7.
Well, that's what happened with Bottas. With 8 minutes left, he jumped up to, like, 5th place or something, and then everybody kind of saw that and was like, oh, we need to go now, and they all switched their tires and then ended up going crazy.
Yeah, so knocked out of that session was Hülkenberg, Magnussen, Yuki Tsunoda, Logan Sargent, and Zhou. And honestly, Yuki Tsunoda at this point
was already going to be starting P20 because he technically had a 60-place grid penalty because of all the things he got changed in his car. So he already knew he was going to be starting P20.
Yeah.
I was shocked that the Haas's struggled so much, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, it might just be, one, they might have brought something. I don't have notes on who brought upgrades this weekend, to be candid. But also, it could just be the way the track and the car work, you know?
All right, Q2.
The track continued to evolve, making the grid constantly move, but then the rain came back.
Yeah.
So this is one of those moments where it was like, you could see the panic. The rain started. Checo was able to move on to Q3, but just barely coming in at P10. I gotta say, F1 your reports are lovely and wonderful, but y'all really, like, drove home the fact that Checo is, like, dealing with a lot of, like, stress due to poor performance.
Yeah, that's the other thing we forgot to mention during our
like,
news segment.
So, long story short, for those that aren't in the loop, Checo, there's all these rumors swirling that due to his performance and the current, like, either the rate or the percentage of, like, difference between him and Max, it's very similar to where Alex Albon, Pierre Gasly, all the drivers we've seen taken out of that second Red Bull seat, Checo's there. He's performing where they were when they were kicked out.
Yeah.
And so the assumption is that there are tons of rumors swirling. No one knows what's true. I actually have a comment at the end about something Checo said regarding the whole matter, but it is the only question the media is interested in out of the poor guy. And F1, you really, like, every single time they brought up Checo, they were like, who's under stress due to poor performance.
Like,
and
no
it's
shit.
like, we know. Like,
He's been that way for the last 3 years.
like, yeah, we've seen the comment. Like, his own team is...
Yeah. But Checo got P10 by only 0.3 thousandths of a second. So Alex Albon was 0.3 thousandths of a second. No, not 0.3. He was 3 thousandths of a second. I'm sorry. Behind Checo, and he ended up in P11. So the people who got kicked out were Alex Albon, Pierre Gasly, Daniel Ricciardo, Valtteri Bottas, and Lance Stroll. Q3. So everyone kind of just put in times at first because of the threat of rain. Mercedes and McLaren were actually two of the teams that ended up staying out throughout when everybody like had gone into the garage. And I think that helped benefit them because they were able to get their times down a bit during when the track was a little bit drier. Because then when people came back out at the end, there wasn't like a huge change in the order, it felt like.
Okay.
I don't know if you noticed that.
No, not really.
Okay, what did you have for Q3?
Just that Max showed domination. I didn't have a lot for Q3.
Well, yeah, Max did show domination, unfortunately for us.
I didn't have a lot for Q3.
So the order for that one was Max P1, Charles P2, Checo P3, Lewis P4, Lando P5, Oscar P6, George P7, Carlos P8, Fernando P9, and Esteban P10. I think that's everything for quali.
Ready to get on for the race?
It's race time. So the start happens, as it does, every time, every weekend.
That's strong reporting, Emma.
I know, it's really amazing. Checo lost a bit at the start.
Well, hold on. She missed a whole part.
Okay.
While Max did secure P1, like we just said, he was given that grid place penalty, so he's pushed down to P11. Charles would start on pole, and then obviously, like we said, Yuki would start at the back of the grid, given that 60-place grid penalty. Zhou was also given a 3-place grid penalty because of impeding Max in Q1. And everyone was on mediums except for Carlos and Zhou, who are on hard, and Danny were on softs. So.
Good to know. Love that.
Screw you.
Okay, so the start happens. 5 lights out. It's 5? Yeah, it's 5 lights out.
Yeah.
Okay. Lewis and Checo. Checo kind of comes across. Lewis had a really good start, and so did Oscar. Lando, what? What is happening?
It was not great.
Every time.
It's okay. Everyone.
We all have our weaknesses.
Yeah.
And this is yours. Yeah.
Maybe he just needs the break.
Maybe he just doesn't like starts.
Yeah.
I don't know if he's been good at starts in other seasons. I don't remember him. He didn't really, I feel like, qualify in the top 3 a lot last year. It was only like a few times. And so, like, he had one really great start at the British Grand Prix last year, but then the rest of them, I feel like it was just like an average start, like nothing crazy. But he's been losing, like, several places every start now, I feel like.
Yeah, I mean, there was a lot of movement just in general. A lot of people moved up, so I'll give them that. Like, at the end
he
of the
ended
day.
up on the gravel, which is what dropped him back to 7th. It happens.
I don't really have anything until Zhou.
Okay, so I have a little bit. Yeah. So Lewis and Checo have been fighting. Lewis passed Checo pretty quickly. And then we have Lewis, who had DRS on Charles, and so he was chasing Charles, and he actually ended up passing Charles for the lead. Off the start, Max was up 3 spots, so from P11 to P8, and because Lando had dropped back to 7th, he was right behind Lando. He was right behind Lando, which was super fun. Lap 3, Lewis was in the lead, so that's when Lewis actually passed Charles, and then now is when we have Zhou losing power.
Yeah, he essentially just, like, slows, or, like, just rolls.
He was just like, I don't have any power, guys, and rolled back to the pit and was out. I guess it was a power unit problem.
Yeah, there wasn't a lot of discourse about it. It just seemed that he was struggling, made it into the pit lane, and then ultimately retired the car. Honestly, I don't see what is going on at that team.
I have no idea.
It's really hard because I just feel like there's not a lot of sense of, like, direction or...
Yeah.
And I feel like sometimes the lower teams in the points don't get the media attention that the higher teams get. So, like, maybe that's why. But I just feel like we know really little about the team. All anyone talks about when they refer to Kick Sauber is fucking Audi in 2026.
Yeah. It's like, why are you racing this year if you're just as...
I almost feel like they're like a ghost team at this point where they're just, like, there for the experience. And that sucks because there's so many hardworking people behind every team.
Yeah.
But I just, like... I don't know what they're doing. So many changes happen all the freaking time. Like, I struggle to understand.
I feel like people deserve better than what they've been given sometimes.
Yeah, and I'm
glad that Zhou was able to have a good sprint race in China for his home race, because with the way that they have... With the way that the management has happened this year with Stake and the car being the way it is, he's unable to even show a good performance. And so he's not going to be on the grid next year.
Yeah, no.
So, yeah. And then people started pitting for hards. This race is like 44 laps, and to be honest, I feel like it just like flew by. Like at one point I looked up and I was like, oh my gosh, we're already halfway, I guess.
Yeah, there was a lot of conversation on how many stops it would be because of the length.
Yeah. There
was discourse of, will anyone attempt a one stop? And I think a lot of people kind of dismissed that pretty early once everyone did their first pit. And then, I don't know when, was it later on when George had this strategy conversation, or was it pretty early on that he decided to just, like, full send? I think it was, like, middle.
I think it was middle.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But...
Because at around lap 10, George and Max both pit, and they both got hards, I believe. Or, no, George had started on hards and switched to mediums.
Which, lapping at lap 10, pitting at lap 10, gave everyone the impression, like, he's automatic two-stop.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he, in fact, did not. So, Lewis also pit, but at lap 12, and one thing that they were mentioning, actually, I think it might have been during the race, Mercedes, they never really, deviate from each other when it comes to strategy for pits. Mm-hmm. They always basically run the same strategy in the sense of, not necessarily, like, the exact same tires every time for each other, but, like, when you're gonna pit is basically the same every time. And then we see that with Lewis pitting at lap 12, but George decided to not pit again for the rest of the race, which is a deviation from what's pretty typical for them. Checo and Oscar also pit at lap 12. I was paying very close attention to McLaren's strategy this weekend. I wanted to see what they were going to do compared to last weekend and see what they've learned.
There was one point where you definitely got a little nervous.
Yeah. I was like, what? Because Lando got called in for the pit first the second time, and I was like, oh no, is this going to be a round 2? Like, please don't do this to them again. At lap 12, Oscar passed George. After George had actually undercut Oscar, Oscar was still able to pass him, though. Lap 15, we see Alex Albon pass Yuki for 10th place. So we thought that there was going to be some Williams points. There, in fact, was not, unfortunately.
So close. It's
I
so
know.
far.
Lap 16, we see Lando pit for hards. And then there was a quick little yellow flag immediately after that.
Oh, also when he did pit, he did undercut Carlos.
Yes, he did.
Yeah.
There was also Carlos in some gravel quickly, which is what the yellow flag was for.
Yeah.
He saved it pretty easily. I really love gravel traps. It makes it so much more interesting.
I feel like it's like also, and I'm not a driver, but from a spectator point of view, I feel like it's the easiest way to see like that level of a mistake.
Yeah.
And it's like I feel like it's a quick correction, if not
You have
total
to, if
failure.
not, yeah.
So yeah, I mean, they obviously there's only so much you can do if it's like a multi-sport race course in terms of safety. You know, if motorcycles are there, you can only have so much gravel.
Yeah.
But yeah, I feel like they've been a little bit more incorporated this season, or at least more talked about.
It definitely makes it a bit more interesting for the spectators. So lap 20, we see Carlos go in and pit. Then lap 21, we have George pass Checo. I feel like there was just like a lot of passing, just depending on when you were pitting or not. That was the majority of the race.
Well, and that was the thing. So like the way it's been settling is like the top 8 are all within 15 to 12 seconds.
Everything was actually very close this race.
Well, and so I have it where like all my notes are like Lewis pitted, came out in 6th, and then it's like Lewis is now in the lead. And so like that's what it was. There was so much movement happening, so much undercuts. Like it's hard to like go through it because there's so much grid movement. Yeah. You know.
So Lando, like I said, had gone in for hards at lap 16, and when he came out of the pits, he was 4.5 seconds behind Max, and at this point, it's like lap 20 like early 20s. He is within 1 second of Max. Yeah. He was able to catch up that much. Lando, I have thoughts.
Share them.
This was something that happened last year, and it's stuff that's happened this year as well, and there's a lot of times where Lando, I feel like, waits to pass someone, and that's what the entire, like, last 10 laps of the race I felt like were for him. Like, he was behind Max by, like, 1 second for the majority of the race, and just didn't pass, and he has the better car.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it's like something he struggles with. I don't know if it's a strategy point of view because I'm not a driver. Like, I don't know the ins and outs of it. But it is something. But I've seen Oscar kind of get stuck behind people too, which at one point he did later on in the race. He got
the McLarens don't do well in dirty air at all.
Well, and that's the thing is that it's almost like they get so close. They get to that like 0.4 seconds away, and then they can never... They can never, like, grab that pass.
Yeah.
Which I don't know if it's the car performance or just, you know, maybe a way they're trained to drive. Or, you know, a training management of passing for that team. But Oscar really was stuck behind Charles for a bit of time, too.
Well, yeah, so lap 26, we see Charles go in and pit. And then lap 27, we see Lewis go in and pit. And Lewis was in the lead, and Oscar was right behind him.
So at this point, once Lewis pits, Oscar's now in the lead.
And you literally hear him say to his radio, to his race engineer, clean air is king, which was phenomenal to hear. And he was able to move up the gap a little bit between him and second place. And then eventually it started to, the gap started to shorten a little bit, and so then they were like, okay, come in a pit.
Because as his tires aged, you saw the new tires just outperforming, and he knew at that point, which was, you know, good on McLaren as opposed to letting him do 2 more extra free laps.
Well, so lap 29, we see Carlos box again, so only 9 laps after he had boxed the first time, which was an interesting choice. Lap 30, we see Lando box, and then immediately after that, we see Oscar pit.
Which is where you got nervous.
Yeah, because I was like, why are you putting in Lando first?
Mm-hmm. You, like, immediately started sweating. You're like, oh, God, is this a repeat of last weekend?
I know, I think I have a little PTSD. We see Oscar then pit immediately after because he was losing time to Lewis, but it was a 4.4-second pit stop, so Oscar actually went past his lines a little bit when he came into the pit stop, and the guy at the front of, like, where he, like, catches the front of the car.
He caught some air.
Bro caught, like, the weight of the entire F1 car just coming
Yeah.
at him, and then afterwards you see F1 TV, like, pan to him in the garage, and he's, like, trying to, like, get a crick out of his neck or whatever. Like, it almost looked like he was like, oh my gosh, like, did that just happen?
It was forceful. There was a lot of force behind that pit stop, but
everybody had to shift also, though.
Yeah, so that's what ends up happening for our new listeners. That's what ends up happening is if you miss the marks, you're too far ahead. Everyone that comes in, the whole pit crew, like, everything's very, like, there's
in an exact
a reason
spot
for every spot.
Yeah.
And so now they all have to shift, which, you know, think about how quickly you can shift in your seat. You know, that takes a second. And so it added an additional second, slowing down the pit stop, which was essentially what they needed. They needed a fast pit stop to basically, I think, undercut Charles.
I think that's what they were trying to do.
But ultimately it didn't pan out.
He's fine in the end.
We'll get over it.
I think Oscar will get over it.
It's not about me. It's
I actually
about
don't
him.
know if Oscar will get over it now that he's been promoted to second, and it was by, like, 0.5 of a second that he got second. And so he probably could have won again if that hadn't happened.
It's okay.
What again? If my mom had balls, and she'd be my dad.
Yeah.
To quote Max.
Max.
Okay, so after that, we see Lando and Max. They're both told to push by the race engineers. And this is when Lando was just trying to pass Max, and it just never happened from there on out. Lap 35, we see Oscar trying to pass Charles. Lap 36, we actually see Oscar pass Charles, and it was a ballsy pass.
Yeah.
It was a good pass.
He attempted it at first, I think a lap or two prior.
Lap 35.
Didn't succeed, and then redid it, and honestly, I was stressed.
Yeah.
Because I, at that point, I was like, if he doesn't make it on the second attempt, then he's just gonna settle here. Mm-hmm. And we're just gonna have what's going on with Lando.
Yeah. Okay. Lap 39, we see Carlos pass Checo, because that's still going. Stuff's happening in the middle of the grid.
Yeah.
And then for, like, the last 5 laps, it was literally just Lewis being in DRS range of George. So George is leading the pack. And we're realizing that he's leading the pack because he only stopped once, and he is somehow making those mediums last for 34 laps.
Did we mention that he had a conversation earlier that
at some point in the race?
At some point, I don't remember when, but I feel like they did play the radio message where
they did.
He was like, let's maybe attempt a one stop. And, I mean, he pitted on lap 10. So 1 stop, so 34 laps on hards. He ended up doing a phenomenal job.
Yeah.
I definitely... It's one of those, you know, if there were 2 more laps, he never would have, you know, come out at first. But, yeah, I definitely think it was ballsy. And what did he have to lose, you know?
Well, so there's actually stuff we'll talk about after when we do our final thoughts relating to George's decision on that. Yeah. So for the last few laps, Lewis was just in DRS range, and then all of a sudden, in the back of the frame, you see Oscar Piastri creeping up.
George is pretty well defending, though. Like, Lewis couldn't get past.
They did. So on the Mercedes radios, they were like, just make sure you have enough room for each other.
Yeah.
Like, you can race, but, like, do not screw up this 1-2.
Yeah.
I don't think they raced. I think Lewis was happy with where he was and was just like...
I don't know, though, because his post-race interviews, he looked annoyed. He did not look happy.
Yeah.
He was really short.
Well, that's what we're going to talk about after.
He was pissed about the strategy, so, like, I don't know.
Yeah.
I think he was probably frustrated, and then he also, something, I don't know if you noticed, he kept making little mistakes. That's what was killing Lewis at the end. He kept making little slip-ups that was causing him not to...
I think he locked up at one point.
He kept locking up. And so as Lewis and George are defending, trying to fight for first.
Oscar was doing-
is just, like, Jaws. Like,
he was
just
doing
creeping.
laps that were 1.2 to, like, 1.5 seconds faster than both Lewis and George. So he was just, his time was dropping. And you just see him, like, barreling down to them. And then he ended up basically getting stuck in a DRS train. Because if Lewis can't pass George, it's going to be impossible for Oscar to pass them.
Well, and I think by the last lap, like, I don't think he'd gotten into DRS range fast enough at that point that there, like, wasn't.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah. We did see Checo go into the pit, like, lap 43 for...
New tires.
A new tires.
And
so
he
that
ended up getting fast lap.
Yeah, which, good for him. I'm happy for him.
Yeah.
And then... Yeah, my last comment was just that George stopped on lap 10, so he had his tires on for 34 laps, and he technically won the race, but now did not win the race and was disqualified after the fact.
Prior to this news, Lewis was unable to pass George and finished the race 0.526 seconds behind his teammate.
Yeah.
So, I feel like it's pretty close.
Yeah.
I feel like that's the closest 1-2 finish we've had in a while. Trying to think
I think
of the next one.
Lando has come close. Like at Imola, Lando was like a second from Max or something like that. Like there's been a few Lando Max finishes that like were like that, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, so the ultimate final
top 10.
Top 10, thank you. Oh my god. George ended up, at this point, was in first, but now he's disqualified. So, we'll go...
We're just going to read the order from when it first happened, and then
just
assume from there.
George.
Yeah.
Push everyone up a spot, guys. Use your brains. George ended up coming in first, Lewis in second, Oscar in third, Charles in fourth, Max in fifth, Lando in sixth, Carlos in seventh, Checo in eighth, Fernando in ninth, and Esteban in 10th. So, Lando ended up getting stuck behind Max, where he was for a while, and then Checo ended up pretty much dropping back as people passed him.
Yeah.
I thought it was... I feel like after the last few races we've had that have been
this was a
so
team
exciting,
race.
It was good, it was fun, it was
better than a lot of last year.
Yeah, it was better, but it was... I think you could tell everyone needs the break.
We all need some sleep.
Yeah.
Including us.
Yes.
Okay, we're going to go to our final thoughts now. Like we were saying during the race bit, Lewis was not happy after the race. So basically, he was frustrated that he was called into box, apparently, when his tires were, like, fine, and he could have kept going on them. So he was frustrated that he was not given the option of a one-stop when George was. Even though George made the call, they still, like, at some point could have been like, okay, Lewis, do you want to do a one-stop? And I don't think they did, and so he was frustrated about that, because I think he thought if he had the opportunity for it, then he could have won. Now you did, bud, so...
Yeah.
I guess be happy about that. Yeah.
So, two things that were said after the race, and again, I don't want this to be one of those things that we're about to overanalyze 4 words that Max said, but that's essentially what we're about to do. Max made a comment, those days are behind, regarding Red Bull being able to move up and win from the back of the pack. Basically stating if this was, even last year, maybe there would have been the chance for him to start in 11th and he would have ended up winning.
He did do that last year.
Yeah.
And he would win by, like, a lot.
I just thought it was a really interesting comment to say. And obviously, again, understand that these media conversations happen so quickly after the race that this could have just been adrenaline and a frustration that was said after a poor performance in Max's eyes. But I do think it's interesting because there has been this concern with the departure of Adrian Newey. There's been this concern of what is the future of the Red Bull car? Yeah. Is it going to dominate? And I think sitting there and having your number one driver who is constantly stated that this team builds and revolves around Max. I think it's really interesting that, the figurehead of this team is stating those days are behind, which, in my eyes, obviously we've seen the way Lewis talks about the car. All these guys really beat down on the car when they're not happy.
Yeah.
So it could just be that in essence, but I wonder too if you're starting to see all the rumors swirling of Max's departure, if it's going to come to Red Bull, maybe not this year, but
I think it'll have at least another year, and if the performance is like this... Actually, no, I could see it happening for another year, and then 2026, just because the regulation changes, I would be surprised if he goes elsewhere. And then if 2026 isn't good, then he might go somewhere else.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've seen crazier things happen.
Yeah.
So, it's anyone's game. But then an additional comment that was made, and this was kind of going back to Checo and the just mounting amounts of not only pressure from media and the teams, but also just like spectators and the way people are approaching this issue. I mean, this is a driver who you guys have to remember he has dealt with huge bouts of racism towards him, his nationality, his intelligence due to like people's perceived bigotry of these nations. And so he's kind of sat there and said that he's not going to be responding to any more speculations about his future, that he's putting this behind him and he's a part of this team. His focus is on this team.
I think that's a good response.
And I think, obviously, that's like the perfect, that's the response that's needed. And I think if any of us were dealing with this amount of just like constant berating pressure, I think
it's not like it's just this season, like it's several seasons now where it's always like this.
I mean, it was this time last year that Helmut Marko was making comments about Checo that were nothing if not, disgusting. And so I think we have to sit here and, there are so many moments where I think of all of the anti-bullying, like, things that we had to sit through growing up. And, there are 20 people on the grid. There are 20 faces that are this entire sport. And the constant ridicule that they get, their partners get, it's crazy to sit there and have to... And the wild part
is that it's not even just from, like, the keyboard warriors online that are like commenting stuff on like Instagram posts. Like it's from the media that actually sees them face to face.
It's from his own team.
Yeah.
And so, and if it's not him, it's other drivers have faced this ridicule. And so I definitely think, I think there's going to be continuous speculation if nothing comes over the silly season. I think Liam Lawson and another driver are expected to do some practice runs.
Liam and Danny.
And,
where's Yuki?
Unfortunately, this isn't the first time we've seen Red Bull remove a driver. It probably won't be the last. Do I like this practice?
No.
No. Would I do this if I was in charge? I don't know. Yeah. I don't run an F1 team. So that was kind of the tidbits I took. Additionally, Carlos Sainz was asked about his freaking plans for next year. Apparently, he completely dissuaded a sabbatical, which was what Emma was under the assumption. She was like, at this rate, take a year. But I don't know. It's funny. I was thinking about this watching his interview in the post-race show. And typically, so we haven't watched this. I don't think there's ever really been this much movement in a season. Like this much. Maybe. This many open seats. If not, this is like a pretty big amount of movement. But typically, drivers don't announce where they're going until right now. And so we've been sitting here and, last weekend we were like, I feel like we've lost the plot. Last weekend or 2 weekends ago, really, I feel like I lost the plot. And it's like, I think the problem is that Carlos's team kind of had us, like, rumbling for an announcement during the Spanish Grand Prix. Now it's how many rounds later and we're still up in the air. And obviously, again, we say this every time, this is a business decision. It takes time. I'm not in those shoes. I will probably never be making deals like that in my life. But, like, You teased. Make a decision.
Yeah.
So.
There are two other things that I forgot to mention at the beginning when we were talking about the news is Bruno Famin, the team principal of Alpine, is leaving after today, actually.
Another one bites the dust.
I mean, last year, this weekend, was when they said that Otmar was leaving as well. They really love making big announcements during the Spa weekend, apparently. And the other thing, so last week, obviously we all know the whole Lando-Oscar situation that happened, and there was a lot of heat online.
We said it from the beginning, it was going to be very divided.
Yeah, and Lando did make comments at the beginning of this race weekend that he wasn't proud of the way that he had behaved. People asked Lewis about the cool-down room, and Lewis was like, I was in my mid-20s once before, and I remember being really heated after a race, and I'm not going to read into it because it's whatever. It's not a big deal. But yeah, Lando did make a point to say, like, a few times that he wasn't happy with the way he behaved, that he kind of feels like he tainted Oscar's first win a bit. And, yeah.
Put it to bed.
Yeah, pack it up. People. We don't need to talk about it anymore.
Done. Deal. Wipe our hands of it.
Hopefully.
Just go into summer season. Watch the Olympics.
Yes, watch the Olympics.
Watch the Paralympics, too.
Yes. We have a family member that's going to be with Team Canada in the Paralympics.
Our cousin Katie will be throwing shot put for the Canadian Paralympic team.
So if you watch the Paralympics, make sure to catch her.
Yeah. Katie Pegg.
This is also going to be our last episode in this studio. We are going to have our own home studio setup situation. So it's the end of an era.
I'm kind of sad.
It is a little weird, but we will have our better mics next episode. Everything will just be like a whole nice setup.
Do you remember coming in here and figuring out the first episode we filmed in, like, comfy chairs?
Oh, it was bad.
It was bad, and we were trying so hard to figure out the furniture in here, and then we just figured out this news reporter setup worked best.
At least in this
for those
room.
that are watching.
We are probably going to have comfy chairs in our setup, and we won't really have a table. At least that's the plan, just so that we can fit everything in the room that we're going to be doing this in. But we will have the better mics that we've had before. A couple episodes ago when we were separated, we are going to be using those mics from now on, which is super exciting. So you're going to have much better audio coming up. And our background's going to have some F1 related posters.
Instead of this random
music recording stuff.
Stock images.
We do live in Nashville, so it makes
now we'll
sense.
Just have F1 related stock images.
Yeah, it's great.
Yeah.
It's super fun. Make sure to go on all of our social media, follow, like, share, do all the things.
I think we haven't even discussed it, so I'm saying this right now. I don't know if we will get multiple episodes out during summer season, if any.
Or I think we will get one. Get ready for it. Get ready for the beginning of the season. For
any
the second part of the
announcements,
season, because it is silly season, so there's going to be some stuff going on.
But I think we'll probably be a little quiet the next week or two.
They need a break, the F1 people.
Nothing's going to, unless an announcement is made, nothing's really going to be happening.
Yeah.
So, take the time. Enjoy it.
Yes.
Enjoy the end of the summer. We're going to go friggin' move.
So much fun. Speaking of that, we actually do have to now
literally gotta go
start moving stuff into the house. So, bye guys.
Bye.